I'm delighted to be asked here this evening, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak on secular education. The discussion this evening is on the challenges that remain to building a secular republic in 2016. One of those challenges is the education system. The education system is a huge subject, so I'm going to focus on one aspect of that. I couldn't speak about it. We'd be here half the night. I mean, Atheist Ireland, we've just finished a submission on the new course that the state are bringing in on religion and ethics, and it was 13 pages long. So we couldn't, speak about it. There's so many aspects of it. But I will speak about the control that private bodies have over our education system, and how that works, that control works on the ground. I wanted to speak first about a recent case at the European Court. It was in the last few years, and it's a very important case, and it has got a good bit of publicity, but there's areas of it that haven't got publicity. Is the Louise O'Keeffe case. Louise O'Keeffe is a Cork woman that she was sexually abused in her national school in Dundero in County Cork. And she was trying to hold the state responsible for the protection of her rights and the failure of the state to protect her from sexual abuse in her local national school. It was the principal that had abused her, and he was charged and jailed, and that went forward. But the state failed to protect her. They had nothing in place. So it ended up in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said to her, one of the things that they said, and Justice Hardiman was one of those, he said that the state weren't responsible because they ceded control to the interests of private bodies, which are private patron bodies in our education system, which means that the state literally handed over control to these private bodies. So she took her case to the European Court, and we know that she did win, but buried down in the depths of that case was a very interesting remarks by the Irish state about the education system, which I'm going to just read those for you now. It didn't get much publicity or anything like that. The last government was in place when they said, this is the Irish state. We the people, this is what we said to the European Court. They were representing us. The government endorsed the Supreme Court's description of the development and structure of the Irish primary education system, adding that it existed when the Irish state was created in 1922 and was maintained with the enactment by the people of Article 42 of the Irish Constitution in 1937. Dundero National School was therefore owned, operated and managed by the Catholic Church and its representatives. Leo Hickey, that was the principal that abused her, was not a state employee, but was employed by the manager, who in turn managed the school on behalf of the patron. This was not a technical bureaucratic distinction, but a real ceding of the ownership and management of schools to denominations. This situation suited the majority and minority denominations. It reflected the will of the Irish people, and it was not the function of this court to recast the relationships which formed the basis of a significant portion of the Irish primary school system. The suggestion that primary education was a national enterprise to be entirely state-run in an advanced democratic state stemmed from a particular ideological I knew it, I'd get stuck on that. Ideological outlook that was not necessarily shared by all contracting states and not by Ireland. They underlined that no legislation obliged a child to attend a national school, as the law allowed other schooling options. As we all know, the European Court did not accept this analysis and told this advanced democracy that it couldn't avoid its convention obligations by delegating them to a private entity. We had the European Court telling this republic of ours that it was responsible for the protection of small children from sexual abuse in the education system. The court also said that the state could have and should have chosen to provide education itself. Louise won her case under Article 3, which is the prohibition of torture and cruel and inhuman treatment, and Article 13, the right to an effective remedy. This article, Article 13, means that Louise, and consequently the rest of us, have a right to hold the state responsible for the protection of our human rights in the education system, and that the state must have an effective remedy to vindicate those rights. So in the last few years, this republic of ours claimed that it was not responsible for the protection of one of its most vulnerable citizens, while they were accessing their constitutional right to education. It also seems from those comments that in a republic that claims to cherish all the children equally, that we have no problem with absolving ourselves of the responsibility to protect children and delegating that responsibility in the main to agents of a foreign state, the Catholic Church. This is supposed to reflect the will of the Irish people. Really? This case has the potential to change things considerably. Unfortunately, the state has now confined the judgment to sexual abuse under Article 3 and 13. The state has said that having state control of the education system was a particular ideological outlook that was not necessarily shared by all contracting states and not by Ireland. The Irish education system is unique. No other country hands control of its education system to private bodies, and where one of those private bodies is a foreign state. No other country is stupid enough to do this. The state is claiming that our education system suits the majority and minority denominations. The state never mentioned what the non-religious thought about this state of affairs. They didn't get a mention at all. As for it suiting the majority and minority denominations, well, they can scrap that claim now, as we now have the Ahmadi Muslims and evangelical Christians calling for a secular education system. Atheist Ireland, the Ahmadi Muslims and the Evangelical Alliance are now working together to promote a secular education system. There are over 126 different religions in this country now, and over the years I've never met a parent from one of those minority faiths that supports religious discrimination in the education system and who supports Section 7.3c of the Equal Status Act, which that is the section that lets schools discriminate against children in their locality. Let me explain to you what the state is claiming is the will of the Irish people. Remember, patron bodies, and the largest patron body, they control over 90% of our primary schools and the vast majority of second level. We could get into what the ETBs or the Education Training Boards, the VECs do as well, but that's another 2 meetings, I'd say. So we won't go there, but it is a very interesting subject. They are not state schools, they are run as religious schools, the ETBs, and we have an awful lot of difficulty, as Claire I think has asked, a lot of people have asked questions for us in the Dáil about it. On the ground, patron bodies have control over the boards of management. They have a veto over parents that are elected to the boards of management of all our primary schools. The state is claiming that this is the will of the people. They are claiming that it's the will of the people that the local bishop can veto the appointment of parents to the board of management of their local publicly funded school. The patron, the local bishop, can also veto the appointment of the 2 teacher representatives on the board of management. The church also appoints 2 representatives on the board. So they have the 2 representatives. They can veto the parents that are elected to the board, and they can veto the teachers. They have control of the board, that means. The Board of Management of the school is obliged and is legally obliged under the Education Act to uphold the ethos of the patron. The Board of Management is obliged under the Education Act as well to send all policies of the school to the patron for approval. One of those policies is the admissions policy. We all know that the Equal Status Act gives exemptions to schools with a religious ethos to give preference to co-religionists. And we all know that that's your local school, publicly funded national school, if it is under the patronage of the Catholic Church, asks for baptismal certificates. It doesn't stop at the school. If you do get your child in there, the discrimination doesn't stop there, and I'll go into that a little bit. They can also refuse access if they believe that a 5-year-old will undermine their ethos. So there's two aspects of that exemption. They can give preference to co-religionists, but they can refuse your 5-year-old if they think they're going to undermine their ethos. Now that is just, it's unbelievable, that's ridiculous. What 5-year-old's going to undermine an ethos? Does the control end there? No, it doesn't. If you want to work as a teacher, chances are that you will only get employment in a school with a religious ethos, given that over 90% of schools are religious schools. The vast majority of schools require teachers to have a Catholic certificate in religious studies before they will employ you. You are also obliged to uphold the ethos of the patron. I heard recently that a master's programme in Christian leadership in education has become the standard preparation programme for new principals in faith-based primary and secondary schools. Faith-based primary and secondary schools make up the vast majority of our schools. This master's programme is granted by the Mater Dei Institute and St Patrick's College, Drumcondra. The Mater Dei Institute of Education and St Patrick's College in Drumcondra are colleges of Dublin City University, DCU. We now have DCU, a public body and an organ of the state, enabling this religious discrimination against minorities. Why should a teacher from a minority faith or an atheist have to take a master's programme in Christian leadership and the Catholic certificate in religious studies to gain access to the teaching profession? In this country, if you want to get a job as a teacher, your best chances are to pretend that you are a Catholic, and as the Employment Equality Act gives exemptions to schools with a religious ethos, and we know that happens. Schools can and do integrate religion into the state curriculum. That has not changed even with the recent removal of Rule 68 of the Rules for National Schools. It is part of the ethos of the Catholic Church to integrate religion into other subjects and the daily life of the school. In addition, the primary school curriculum obliges all schools to promote the moral and spiritual development of all children and bring them to a knowledge of God. In the primary school curriculum, spiritual means belief in a higher being. Now that's the state primary school curriculum. It's in the introduction to the primary school curriculum, that is. The following might just give you a little better understanding of how this system works. The Department of Education recently released a document on, they were looking for submissions on advancing school autonomy, and Atheist Ireland made a submission. So they're advancing school autonomy. I'm not joking you, they are. And they said in this document, while as noted above, the operating rules for schools are largely set by the state, the ethos espoused by the trustees, patrons, can inform aspects of how those operating rules are acted upon in schools. So you can see what it is. The state sets the operating rules, and the ethos can inform that the operating rules, and they can deliver the curriculum according to their own ethos. They're not obliged to deliver it objectively, critically and pluralistically. So this republic sets out the operating rules, and the agents of a foreign state can inform aspects of how those operating rules are acted upon in schools. We fund this system, all our taxes go to pay for this. Last year, the Department of Justice, Equality and Law Reform told Atheist Ireland that the state was constitutionally obliged to buttress religion. Also last year, during pressure over removing religious discrimination in our education system, the Irish government claimed that removing this discrimination would be unconstitutional because the state had an obligation to buttress religion. This claim is based on an unpublished legal opinion and on personal opinions. This is the first time that the government is retreating behind claims of unconstitutionality. Ireland has never told the United Nations or the Council of Europe that protecting the human rights of atheists and minority faiths in our schools would be unconstitutional. Now, we all know here that refusing a child access to their local school because they can't produce a baptismal certificate is a breach of human rights. I mean, it's a breach of the European Convention. Arguably, it is a breach of our Constitution as well. They have not published any legal opinion that supports this claim, and we have asked them in the interest of democracy to do so. This claim means that our Constitution is incompatible with all our human rights obligations, including the European Convention. Religious discrimination is forbidden under the Convention. Remember, the UN and Council of Europe have raised the issue of religious discrimination in our education system over 9 times. They've spoke about the integrated curriculum, and they've spoken about religious discrimination in access. So there's 9 recommendations under various treaties that we have signed from both the UN and Council of Europe about our education system and amending our education system. So where does this leave us? A few short years ago, the state was claiming that our education system was supported by the majority and minority denominations and was the will of the people. They have now moved on to telling us that they are constitutionally obliged to buttress religion, but they have failed so far to publish any legal opinion on this, and they have never said this to the UN and Council of Europe. I don't believe that the majority of people in this country support religious discrimination. As it stands now, our children leave their human rights at the school gate, as various patron bodies have too much decision-making power over our rights. In 2016, we need to continue to challenge the fact that in this republic, the various private patron bodies control our education system. If the state continues to claim that they cannot remove religious discrimination in our education system, we need to challenge them to publish that legal opinion. If the courts do find that the Constitution obliges, as opposed to permits, the state to support this discrimination, then we urgently need a schools equality referendum. But until then, we need to keep up the pressure to ensure that this republic protects and guarantees the human rights of all parents and their children in the education system. Thank you.